When the final papers arrived, Claire didn't cry. She just sat at her kitchen counter in her half-empty apartment, the letter opener trembling slightly in her hand as she slit the envelope open. The city outside was alive, horns, voices, the faint hum of traffic. Yet everything around her felt muted, as if the world had turned down its volume just for her heartbreak. The ink on the page blurred as she read her name next to his. Final decree of dissolution of marriage. Just like that, 12 years had been reduced to a court document, 2 signatures, and a stamp. She had promised herself she wouldn't look at old photos again, but her phone betrayed her. There they were, vacations, anniversaries, dinners with friends. Each one looked like a life someone else had lived. She scrolled until she couldn't anymore, then set the phone face down and whispered to no one, "It's really over." For weeks afterward, Claire moved through the city like a ghost. She went to work, smiled when required, and came home to silence. Her friends invited her out, wine nights, yoga, a weekend trip, but she wasn't ready to pretend. Nights were the worst. That was when her mind played cruel movies of what-ifs and could-have-beens, looping memories that wouldn't fade. One cold Friday evening she wandered into a tiny cafe she had never noticed before. It sat between a flower shop and a bookstore, with fogged windows and the faint sound of piano drifting from inside. She ordered chamomile tea and sat near the window, staring at the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. That was when she noticed him, sitting 2 tables away, sketching something in a small notebook. He wasn't classically handsome, but there was an ease about him, a kind of quiet focus that drew her in. When she caught him looking up, he smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't about flirting, just acknowledgement. "Cold night," he said, when she went up to refill her cup. "It's freezing," she replied, surprised she'd answered. He nodded toward the window. "I like nights like this. They make the city honest. No one pretends when it's cold." She found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. "That's one way to look at it." "I'm Evan," he said, extending a hand. "Claire." Their handshake was brief, but something about it lingered. She learned he came there every Friday after work to sketch, people, scenes, whatever caught his attention. He was an architect who still loved to draw by hand, a habit most had abandoned. She told him she worked in marketing for a publishing company nearby. They talked until the cafe lights dimmed for closing, and before she left, he said, "Maybe I'll see you next Friday, Claire from the publishing world." She didn't plan on returning, but the following Friday she found herself walking past the same cafe at the same hour. Through the fogged glass she saw him, same table, same sketchbook, same half-smile when he looked up and saw her. Weeks turned into a quiet ritual. They talked about everything, art, cities, heartbreak. She told him little pieces of her story, the marriage that had fallen apart slowly, the way love can fade without either person noticing until it's too late. He listened without pity. He didn't try to fix her. He just listened, and sometimes that was enough. One cold Friday evening she arrived late, and he had already ordered her tea, with honey, just how she liked it. "You remembered," he said. "I pay attention," as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Outside, snow began to fall. They stood by the window watching flakes spiral through the streetlights. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Yeah," he answered, though he wasn't looking at the snow. She felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the tea. Still, part of her hesitated. She wasn't sure she was ready for anything new. She told herself he was just a friend, a kind stranger who had wandered into her story at the exact right time. But kindness has a way of undoing walls. One evening after a long day at work, she found herself crying in the cafe bathroom, not over her ex, but from exhaustion, from trying so hard to look okay. When she returned to their table, Evan noticed immediately. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply reached across the table and held her hand. His palm was warm and steady.
You don't have to be strong all the time, he said quietly. That night he walked her home. The snow had melted into slush, and her boots splashed through puddles as they crossed the street. Outside her apartment building, she turned to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she said, "Do you ever feel like you're meeting someone at exactly the moment you need them most?" He smiled faintly. "I was just thinking the same thing." From then on, their friendship deepened. He taught her to notice details again, how light falls on glass buildings at sunset, how the city hum changes after rain. They spent weekends exploring markets and art galleries, places she hadn't gone to in years. Slowly, the ache that had once filled her began to loosen. One Saturday, they went to an art exhibition featuring architectural sketches. Evan lingered over a series of drawings of bridges. "Bridges fascinate me," he said. "They connect two places that would otherwise stay apart. Kind of like people, I guess." Claire looked at him then, realizing how much he had become her bridge, from the life she had lost to the one she was beginning to find. As spring arrived, the city transformed. The parks filled with color, and so did her life. Her laughter returned. Her friends noticed the change before she did. "You're glowing," her coworker said one morning. Claire laughed it off, but when she caught her reflection in the elevator mirror, she saw it too. Evan never pushed for more than she could give. He seemed to understand that healing isn't a race, but love, once it starts, has its own rhythm. One warm evening in April, they walked along the river. The sky was streaked with gold, and the city lights shimmered on the water. They stopped at the railing, watching boats drift by. "Hard to believe a few months ago I didn't even know you," she said. "Some things are meant to happen exactly when they do," Evan replied. She turned to him, searching his face. "And what do you think this is?" He hesitated, then said, "I think it's something real, but I also think you should tell me when you're ready to find out." It wasn't a confession, not quite, but it stayed with her. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his words, "something real." 2 days later, her ex called out of the blue. His voice was polite, distant. He said, "He heard you were doing well," and there was a pause. Then, "Maybe we could grab coffee sometime, just to talk." She was surprised by how calm she felt. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said gently. "I wish you well, but I've moved on." When she hung up, she realized it was true. The chapter was closed, and she didn't need to look back. That Friday, she returned to the cafe early. Evan wasn't there yet, so she ordered their usual drinks and sat by the window. When he arrived, she slid his cup toward him and said, "You were right." "About what?" He frowned slightly. "Some things are meant to happen exactly when they do." He smiled that same quiet smile she had noticed the very first night. "Are you saying this is one of them?" "I think so." The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was charged, waiting. "Claire," he said softly, "I don't want to be just the person who helps you heal. I want to be the person who's there after." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "Then maybe it's time for after." They left the cafe hand in hand, stepping into the gentle rain. The city lights blurred around them, and for the first time in a long while, the world felt full again, full of promise, of new beginnings, of the quiet miracle of meeting someone who sees you when you've forgotten how to see yourself. Their love didn't arrive with fireworks or grand declarations. It grew in the small moments: morning coffees, shared sketches, laughter in the rain. Claire discovered that love after heartbreak isn't louder, it's deeper, steadier. It's what remains when the noise of pain fades. Years later, they stood on the roof of Evan's building, watching the city sparkle below. "You ever think about how we ended up here?" she asked. "All the time," he said. "I was just a stranger in a cafe." "You were more than that," she whispered. "You were the reason I started believing again." He turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then I guess it's my turn to say thank you for letting me in." When he kissed her, it wasn't a spark, but a slow, steady warmth that felt like coming home. Years later, that little cafe would become their place, where they'd celebrate anniversaries, where he'd propose, where their story would always begin. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive when you're looking for it. Sometimes it finds you when you're lost, sitting alone with a cup of tea, trying to remember how to breathe. Sometimes it looks like a kind stranger who smiles at you across a cafe and stays long enough to teach you that endings can be the start of something beautiful. And if this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about love, hope, and second chances. Tell us how you feel about this story. It might help someone out there.